The Hard Rock Empire is on the air. We are back with another week of podcasting excellence. So glad to have you along with us once again. I am Matt in the studio. We are on to the week of July the 24th. As we get close to wrapping up the month of July, we will have one more week in July coming up next week for music. And despite a limited number of releases on July 24th, this was a very strong week in music. So we definitely encourage you to check out Mike's playlist, which will be posted as a card a little bit later on, and of course is down in the comments. Watch a video first, but then check it out a little bit later because there was a lot to like about the music of July the 24th. So we look forward to talking about it on this week's edition of the Hard Rock Empire, episode number 128. Joining me in studio, as always, is Mike. Mike, how's it going?
Man, what a packed week. I got to listen to, I think, 8 of the new releases that came out on the 24th. Man, so much to talk about, so much to get into. I'm shocked, again, with how few items there were on the list, but how many were really high quality.
Yeah, I think the spreadsheet I saw had 27 total items, and there was a lot. I got to 3 or 4, and I had set to listen to more and just ran out of time, but I have some that I want to go back and check out. Just a wide variety of music as well this week. So I think, again, it's definitely a something for everyone type of week, and probably a handful of things that you and I didn't listen to that if you're into different types of music, you're going to find some things as well. So it was a really, really strong week in music. Of course, again, check out the playlist. Definitely encourage you to do that. Join the Discord as well. You can talk about some of that music with us in Discords. Please stop on by. But before we get to kind of the stuff that you normally talk about at the beginning of the podcast, where we get into some of the things that we didn't pick but you listened to, because, again, there was a lot to listen to this week, there was one particular release that I definitely wanted to spend a little bit of time on because we have talked about this on the podcast. And, of course, we even talked about it when we were recording the weekend that it did come out. And, of course, now we're on to talking about the weekend that it came out. So definitely worth a little bit of an extended discussion. And, of course, that was the release of the Transformers, the movie, the soundtrack, the reformatted edition, just to make sure we have enough colons in that title. Something that has been much anticipated. Of course, we've talked about on the podcast, the 40-year anniversary of the movie. They're going to be re-releasing it in theaters, potentially doing something in addition to that because there's been talk of a post-credits scene that could tease something new potentially on that front. But it's a cover album, and it's also some of the original artists coming back and doing work on the album as well, specifically Stan Bush getting involved with 2 of his well-known tracks, Dare and The Touch. If you're people of our age that listen to this type of music or into Transformers, there's no doubt that you know the soundtrack, and especially the big hits off of the soundtrack, and nostalgia will flood over you when you check this out. But like I said, the new album, the reimagining, I guess, the reformatted edition, as they say, came out on July 24th. And you're always worried anytime it's been so many years, again, 40 years we're talking. They did such a fantastic job with this reformatted edition that I think if you're a fan of the original soundtrack or you're a fan of the animation, this absolutely is a must-purchase item for you.
Yeah, I think anytime we dig up something from the 80s and it's like, hey, we're gonna refresh this, there's always that fear of, oh my God, please don't screw this up. Like, please don't forget what made the original special to begin with. And you mentioned Stan Bush being involved. Also, Vince DiCola coming back. He did a lot of the instrumentals on the original soundtrack. I think notably he redoes Death of Optimus Prime on this one, which is just if you were a kid having watched that, that's a pretty heavy track.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
40 years later.
Yeah, and you know, I've had recommendations of videos talking about what people think kind of the surprise bonus footage is going to be. And it's funny how when you get people who grew up in the 80s, just how defensive they can be of the things they enjoyed then. I was a huge Transformers fan, but personally, I don't care what they do. Like, if they want to go ahead and just retcon everything that happened since, that's fine with me. I mean, whatever it takes. I know the X-Men 97 cartoon was wildly popular when it came out, kind of revisiting that old cartoon from back in the day. As far as the soundtrack goes, though, I mean, it's everything you could possibly want. You got Sebastian Bach singing "Nothing's Gonna Stand in Our Way," Mark Osegueda from Death Angel doing "Hunger," and kind of the man of the week, I think, is the singer from Windrose, Francesco Cavalieri. He sings on this soundtrack "Instruments of Destruction," but also has his own side project that released an album this week. So he's been a busy guy.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a moment because honestly, I kind of wanted to pick that one because to me, it was the most unique album of the week. Absolutely blew me away. We'll get to that a little more in a minute.
This is a guy who plays in a band that sings songs about like dwarves and trolls, and this week you have him doing this completely out of left field side project on top of singing on the Transformers soundtrack. It just totally caught me off guard.
Yeah, for sure. But again, the Transformers soundtrack, it was everything it could have been. It wasn't. It was a faithful recreation of the original, which was great. It was something that where they could bring people back, they still sound like Stan Bush still sounds great.
Yeah.
Again, talking about a lot of years later since his heyday and still really getting it done. Those two songs, really, it's like those songs had to sound good because they're really the linchpin of this album, and they do. A lot of pressure. When you're covering a song like Dare to Be Stupid, which was originally done by Weird Al, and the Knights of Unicron and Torch were involved in that one and did really good job because, again, that's such a unique song. It was very Devo-esque, very, very different, and they did a really nice job of covering that.
It's weird how an artist who is known mainly for parodies and style parodies, when you go to cover his work, it does seem like, man, you better not mess this one up. Like there's a weird bar there, even though maybe it's because Weird Al himself essentially does cover songs in his own way. You can't mess it up. Like it has to be good. But Torch, who also appeared on the Cold Slither album, the G.I. Joe themed album that Raining Phoenix did along with Hasbro, did a great job. I thought that was a great cover, and top to bottom, the soundtrack is just solid.
It's really great. You should definitely check it out. If you're new, if you're younger and you maybe weren't alive when the Transformers, the movie came out, I encourage you to check it out. Without getting too spoilerific, obviously we've already mentioned the Optimus Prime thing, at least from what I remember reading about it, and my memory could be off, but my understanding is the goal was kind of to move on from a lot of the characters.
To kill them all off.
Kill them all off so that you could basically sell more toys.
Yeah.
Here's a new season. Here's a bunch of new characters for you to care about so you can go out and buy all these new Transformer toys. People loved the movie, but people were not happy about that.
What I was amazed about, because I don't remember feeling emotionally scarred from the movie. I loved it.
Yeah.
But man, like when you read how people felt about it online nowadays, kind of looking back, a lot of people really felt kind of betrayed about that movie because, and again, I was 4 years old when this came out, so I don't remember much about it at the time, but you had to be a little suspicious when they started naming the cast, and you have all these like name actors, Orson Welles, Leonard Nimoy, Judd Nelson, all playing Transformers you'd never heard of before. Like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And yeah, sure enough, in like the first 20 minutes, like the Decepticons attack like one of the ships and just murders like 6 of the Autobots or something like that. Then obviously Optimus Prime. But yeah, it basically introduced a brand new cast, a new set of toys, and the liner notes of the soundtrack, if you take a look at it, there's kind of a foreword at the beginning that kind of serves as like a, hey, we wanted to do this because we feel the music really stands up, and it's such a big thing for people of a certain age, but they also kind of use it as a chance to apologize essentially for just how heavy the movie ended up being to a lot of people.
Yeah, because it's one of those things, obviously we spend a lot of time talking about anime, we haven't in a while, but that's one of the topics we typically cover, and something that is true in Japanese anime that up to this point, up until this movie, really wasn't true in the U.S., is the willingness to kill characters off, the willingness to reset casts, to move things along, because that was seen as both kind of the, hey, that's what life is about. So we're not going to hide this from kids, that main characters can die, and your favorite characters in Dragon Ball can die, although they've retconned that by bringing them back in most cases. But that was very common in Japan, was not in the U.S. And it feels like this was that moment where they kind of tested the waters to see, and got such a backlash off of it that, you still, even to this day, a lot of times in cartoons in the U.S. don't see that level of carnage. People get attached to those characters, and they don't want to have you killing them all off. Whereas in Japan, that still continues to this day, that, it's not unusual to have shows built around the main characters dying, or I think at Yu Yu Hakusho, the main character dies in the first episode. Yeah. Like, obviously, there's more to it than that, but it just didn't do that in the U.S. And they just went all out.
I think it probably showed a little bit of a disconnect between the creative people behind it and the fan base, to think that, yeah, no one will care if Optimus dies. We'll have this next guy come in. It's kind of the pro wrestling thing. Like, oh, yeah, we can build a new star. No problem. It doesn't matter if this guy moves on. Like, we'll get this guy as the top guy. And it's not that easy.
No. People have an emotional attachment to characters, to voices, to wrestlers, whatever it may be. And, yeah, there'll be a large group of people that will move on and just say that's the way it goes, and I'm going to like this new guy. And then there'll be people who just never forgive or forget that stuff. So, again, definitely check out the movie if you haven't. It's going to be in theaters again, I believe in September is when that's coming out. I think they're doing like a 4K upscale on that. So definitely worth it if you haven't seen it. Or maybe your only exposure to Transformers in 2026 is the live action movies, because there's probably a generation of people that only know Transformers from the movies and not even from the animation. So this is really something that you should definitely check out. The soundtrack is something you should definitely check out, and kudos to everybody involved in this who absolutely knocked it out of the park. Again, you don't want to let this fan base down again by doing a crappy job redoing this, but they did not. It was absolutely 10 out of 10 and definitely worth picking up.
And the funny thing, too, I remember back when it did come out, which, I mean, obviously we're a few weeks removed from that now in real time, but when you went to the website to pre-order it, they had sold out of the cassette version of it, which totally blows my mind. I pre-bought and received the CD, but I don't know how many they pressed of the cassette, but it had sold out.
If I remember right, there were several of their special edition sets that had sold out by the time we looked at it. There were several, like, involving different vinyls and stuff like that. So, clearly there's a drive and a nostalgia for that. And again, it was really good. I'm excited to see a new generation of people kind of in tune, both to the animation, but also to the music, because to me, Stan Bush was, the reason the type of music he did is the reason why we do a lot of this podcasting stuff, because it was that over-the-top music that he was coming out with in the 80s that made you love that type of over-the-top music.
There were a lot of great soundtracks in the 80s. Let's be real.
Yeah, for sure. And we've talked about some of them. We'll probably talk about more of them as we go forward. But, definitely wanted to give a little bit more time to that. Even though, again, it certainly wasn't the only really strong release that we're going to talk about. I guess since you mentioned it, I'll just touch on the one that I listened to that I was kind of blown away by. You mentioned Francesco Cavalieri, it's hard for me to say his last name, and his side project V.B.O. Vice Business Only. First off, like, I watched the music video, and I encourage you, because you're going to have Mike's playlist in the chat. Go watch the music video to
Did you get about a minute to that and say, what the hell is this?
Yes, 100%. Like, this was so, again, it's another one of those music videos that makes me mad when people use AI, because here are two guys who are just, I don't even know how you describe it. It's like they have one camera and they're just vibing back and forth in a Miami Vice type setup. And it's like, there's no AI anywhere near all this. And this is great. Like, this is so entertaining. Like, it's so outrageous. And the whole album, again, if you haven't listened to the album, and I encourage you to do so, the first track is 3 minutes and 42 seconds of opera music, Vesti la Giuba, which I guarantee you won't know the name.
You'll recognize it.
But you'll recognize the song. It is an opera song that I guarantee most of you have heard. The tracks on it are really good. Fire, Fire was great. Shadow of Your Kiss, kind of the standouts. And then they covered Duran Duran's The Wild Boys at the end and did a great job on that as well. This was so good. I want to shout those guys out. And again, I didn't pick it, but honestly, very easily could have, because again, there was just more than two good things this week. But absolutely deserves your attention.
Yeah, the funny thing about that is I hadn't listened to it yet, and I was just kind of scanning all the albums that I'd kind of planned on potentially listening to just to see if there were any songs that might be cover songs, just to find out.
Yeah.
And I got to that when I saw The Wild Boys. I'm like, I wonder, could that possibly be a Duran Duran cover? And I pulled it up, and I'm like, okay, that's awesome, and now I got to listen to this whole thing, which I'd planned to anyway. But, I mean, this is coming from the guy, again, his regular band, Windrose. I mean, they released Troll Slayer 2 years ago, October 4th, 2024, with tracks like Of Ice and Blood, Dance of the Axes, To Be a Dwarf, Troll Slayer, Legacy of the Forge. What is this?
And this album couldn't really be any farther from that. Like, it is completely on the other end of the music, but it's great.
I love it.
The vocals are great. The video was great. Shout those guys out because that's really great. And again, easily could have been my pick for this week. But it's so out there in a good way that I encourage you heavily to check that thing out. So you mentioned it, V.B.O, definitely honorable mention. If we could pick more than one, it would have absolutely been there. And honestly, it was a toss up between that and the one I picked. It really could have gone either way, but I really love both of them, really about equally. So shout out to V.B.O. Which kind of leads us into the next topic, obviously, is the playlist for this week. Again, it'll appear as a card at the top of the screen. It'll also be down in the comments or in the description of the video, I should say. It may be in the comments as well. It's important. Yeah, you'll be able to find it, but definitely worth checking those out this week because there was such a depth of music that really we haven't had in quite some time. And impossible for us to do justice to everything that was good. But in addition to the two we've already talked about, there are a handful more things that we got a chance to listen to that didn't make our picks, but were definitely worth chatting about. So before we get into what we picked this week, let's talk about some of those other things you found.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I got to mention the Zan Cody album, Beautiful and Damned. That is Zinny Zan and Harry Cody, two of the original members of Shotgun Messiah. Zinny Zan, the original vocalist, he sang on the first album. Harry Cody was there through the entirety of Shotgun Messiah, even by Violent New Breed when they were basically just two people. Solid album. I really enjoyed it, and, I feel bad because I enjoyed it, yet at the same time I'm thinking, we're really kind of one integral part away from an actual reunion of Shotgun Messiah. Obviously, talking about Tim Skold, the bassist on the first album who transitioned over to lead vocals. Drummer Styx Galore played on the first two albums, so that would be another missing piece. But, Second Coming is a tremendous album. Like, I would love to see some of that live.
Styx Galore cannot be his real name.
It sounds like someone that would have been in Steel Panther.
Yeah, for sure.
We got Seiko with Back to Life EP. That is Seiko Kitame, power metal vocalist. I guess the EP is some reimagined tracks from her previous work. Really cool. I listened to it over and over again while I was lifting the other day just because I kept walking in and out of the room, so I didn't really feel like I got the full experience, but that was really enjoyable. We got Marco Goral's Magic Opera with their newest album, The Final Fight, Italian power metal act. Really enjoyable album, kind of long, but definitely worth a listen. Let's see, what have we not mentioned that I have here on my list? Also the newest one from Coven, Japan. They are a traditional metal band, been around about 10 years. Their newest album, Promised Land, hit. Yeah, it was just a lot of stuff this week.
Yeah, those were ones I have to kind of go back and check out. I also enjoyed the playlist track from the band Goot with My Time, and Scar Chamber with Ugly on the Inside was another one that stood out. I haven't had the chance to listen to those full albums, but they stood out to where I definitely would like to check them out as well. So again, this was just a really, really good week. So encourage you to check out Mike's playlist. a little bit later on when you get the opportunity. But of course, when we go through this, the goal is to get it down to one pick each, one new album. Again, this is the week of July the 24th. And we have successfully done that. And it was kind of a painful process this week because there really were more than two things that deserved a full shout out this week. But in the end, we picked two, one each, that we will talk about. And we'll let Mike kick things off as always. What do you have for the week of July the 24th?
Yeah, so starting us off, we are heading to Ireland for the third studio album from an Irish progressive metal project. It's kind of the child of Graham Keane. That project is called the Vicious Head Society, and their newest album is Call of the Void.
Shout out to those guys who've already followed us back on Facebook. Nice. And shout out to all the people who have reacted on Facebook. We even had Wormhole Death, the label, share our post on Facebook from last week. We really do appreciate it. I know some bands are busy and maybe even in the wrong time zones to share our stuff, but anything like that is a huge help to us because it brings more people into the podcast. So we certainly appreciated it. And these guys, this was one that I have not finished the whole album yet, but once I saw you had picked it, I went back and as I expected, this is really, really good.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised by it. I had flagged it as one I wanted to listen to, and by then I'd already listened to 3 or 4 of the others, and this one just kind of gripped me a little more than some of the others on the list. I mentioned this being Graham Keane's thing. He's writer, producer, plays guitars and synths on the album. He's joined by a cast of guest musicians, including Clement Markelge on drums, Nathan Max on vocals, Matthias Menente on bass, and Nahuel Ramos on the synth solos. Not to mention other smaller guest appearances include Paul Phillips and Pat Byrne playing bass on tracks 4 and 7 respectively, Alec Noonan backing vocals on track 7, Wilmer Warbroke on additional vocals on track 5, Bertrand Huve on track 8 plays saxophone, and Sarita plays violin on tracks 5 and 8. Anytime you encounter a progressive metal album, there's always kind of that gamble, because I feel like nowadays so many albums are trending shorter. Yet, when you're doing a progressive project, you're probably not. That's not really your goal. That's not the motivation. So the gamble's always, is what you're writing interesting enough to keep me hooked through longer compositions? And that was not a problem here at all. I would even suggest that the last track on the album, which is 13 minutes, 25 seconds, The Distant Lights or Lights of Home, is one of my favorites on the album. When you read the description of the album on the Bandcamp page, the creative intention behind it, kind of shifting from what they were writing about or what he was writing about to now, feels kind of relatable. It basically says, departing the sweeping societal themes of his earlier work, Keane turns inward, tracing the defining moments that have shaped him with the fading embers of a personal cycle. Call of the Void confronts the slow, corrosive pull of losing one's purpose, capturing the tension between resistance and surrender with unflinching honesty. Keane channels a heavier emotional weight into the music. The result is a sonic landscape that mirrors the arduous path of self-discovery, turbulent, atmospheric, and relentlessly human. Listeners are invited to confront their own recurring cycles to find meaning in the darkness. And, I read that and I just think it's so easy sometimes to kind of get swept up in the bigger picture, but ultimately you can't find your own purpose in things that are beyond your control. And I think that kind of speaks to me. So it's definitely a cool theme of the album and the writing, and I think the song titles and all that kind of factor into that. And again, it's for a longer album, it didn't ever wear on me. Like, I enjoyed it front to back. If I had to pick standout tracks, it would be Fractured, The Edge of Time, Ignite, The Edge of Time Part 2, The Distant Lights of Home, and the track that I picked to listen to, The Void.
Check these guys out. It's the Vicious Head Society with their new album, Call of the Void. This is the 6th track off of that album, entitled The Void. Let's listen to a little bit of that now.
Feel lost in my veins.
Yeah, I like I said, what I've listened to this, I really enjoyed, and as we talked about, because we hear a lot of progressive bands that do metal, and to me, the differentiating factor between the ones that I get, really invested in, and the ones that I tune out as I'm listening to is just the variety of the sound and the ability to hold the listener, even if it is a long and winding track. I feel like sometimes progressive bands like to just show off that they can do these really cool things or write these 8-minute songs that don't seem to go anywhere.
Yeah.
These guys did a good job of both of the kind of the factors. They hold the listener because the songs are interesting. They don't sound samey. Even when they are longer songs, like this one's 7:32, you don't ever get bored of it. I think that's one of the big keys to really what really makes a progressive band one that I want to listen to the full album on. And 52 minutes really does fly by with these guys, which is a testament to just how talented they are and how they're able to keep it fun and interesting and really rocking through the whole album. So it was one that what I've heard so far, and I'm excited to finish it a little later, definitely really enjoyed.
Yeah, I also thought, obviously, the person who created it playing guitars and synths, you would think that's going to be like always in the forefront. But I thought Nathan Max's vocals were really great on this. Just a great choice as far as really good, clean voice. It's not like a James LaBrie higher end thing, but still very, very strong. But when it's something you want the message to be conveyed well, I think that his singing definitely gets the job done. And also the drums. I thought there were some really aggressive drums on the album, which stood out to me. So good job all around.
Yeah, drums, outside of maybe Dream Theater, sometimes get lost in progressive rock. It feels like they're just there to keep the time, and you have the synths and all the stuff like that out.
How many notes the guitarist and the keyboardist can fit in there?
Yeah, so the factor was much more of a balance to this. I thought was really, really good too. So definitely check those guys out. Really strong effort from the Vicious Head Society. Their new album is out as of July the 24th. I'm heading to my pick as well. We were headed to Canada for this pick. And again, it really was very close between these guys and V.B.O. I thought those were really both outstanding albums. In the end, I went with a power heavy metal band from Ottawa, Ontario with their first full-length album. It's the Scepter with Shadows in the Tower. These guys were formed in 2018, but this is their first album. If you go to Metal Archives, you'll note there are at least a half a dozen bands named Scepter or The Scepter. They're not any of these bands. They make that very clear on Metal Archives. I saw several reviews calling these guys a mix of new wave of British heavy metal and European power metal. Definitely see kind of where that fits in. Only place I could find the list of members was on Metal Archive, so apologies to the band if any of these members have changed since that information was updated on there. But according to Metal Archives, the band is made up of Josh Collins on guitars, Stu Everett on bass, John Crawford on drums, Morgan Walsh on guitars, Asher Darling on keyboards, and Abby Dennert on vocals. It's a quick listen. We just talked about a progressive rock album, which was 8 tracks in 52 minutes. This is 8 tracks in 29 minutes, so it's not going to overstay its welcome. But honestly, for the type of music they're playing, I think the shorter tracks work really well. It rocks hard, and then it gets out. I love the guitar harmonies in the songs. It just really pushes the sound of the album out at you. Vocals are great. The sound at times reminds me of Iron Maiden a little bit. But honestly, there are several kind of sounds that they get on this album that differ a little bit one to the next. Obviously, we were judging bands on the album and things like that, but sometimes what maybe differentiates or maybe puts a band over the top when it comes to our picks is some other things. And I noticed on their Facebook page, the band recently played a metal show at a hospital in Canada for a patient who was not healthy enough to leave the hospital. He had never seen a metal show in person, and so the band brought the metal show to him. Just a really cool story, and certainly makes this band really easy to root for. There's a video, if you go to their Facebook, they brought all their lights and stuff into a conference room in the hospital. Just really, really awesome story. Excited to see what these guys are going to do next now that they've got an album out. I would imagine this group would be a lot of fun to listen to live, so it would be great if they make a U.S. tour and get a chance to see them in person. But Overall, this was a lot of fun. Like I said, a quick listen, but a really strong one as well. Standout tracks include Where Art Thou, Protector of the Skies, Taraki in Blood, and the song we're going to listen to is Writing Out. This is the Scepter with Shadows in the Tower. This is the opening track off of that album, Writing Out. Let's listen to a little bit of that now. Yeah, just a lot of fun. You know, I sometimes lean pretty heavily to the AOR stuff, but another thing that always catches my ear is kind of traditional heavy metal. These guys, as soon as you put that first track on, it's like this is a throwback. Obviously with a modern sound, but I really dug this album. Even with just 29 minutes, I thought it was really strong from beginning to end, and excited to see what these guys do next because this is being their first album. They've done really well for their debut effort. Mike, your thoughts on the Scepter?
I love when I'm looking up these bands to create the playlist, and when I run a search, I'll see a video that's just the cover art, and I immediately think, I hope this band sounds like the album cover looks.
Yes.
And this is definitely a case with these guys. Like, their logo looks like something that you would have been drawing on a notebook in 1988. Tremendous stuff. And you know, we've said it a million times. It's great that there's modern music being made that has those hallmarks.
Yeah, for sure. The cover to me looks like some sort of boss battle in an 8-bit video game that, you know, you come up and that guy's waiting for you. So, kudos to those guys. Really great stuff. And again, the human interest story just kind of puts them over the top. So the Scepter, my choice for this week. That wraps up the new music for this week, and it's time to get into the vault where Mike and I will talk about a couple of classic albums you need to check out. Mike running a couple different vault gimmicks. Currently, one of the gimmicks he's running is going through the 90s in the post-grunge era and finding bands that released an album after kind of the hallmark of grunge got started, and finding out, you know, did bands that were popular before that in the, you know, the hair metal, the pop metal era of the late 80s, early 90s, did they change their sound? Did they keep doing what they were doing? What did happen to these bands after grunge took effect? And he's been going through alphabetically up to the letter G this week, and kind of interested on this one because this is a band that is a staple of satellite radio. They get played a lot, but I'm curious as to how many songs off of this particular album are among the rotation on satellite radio. My guess is maybe not as many as you would think, but I'm curious to hear about this album. So Mike, what do you got for the vault this week?
Yeah, this was a weird one because when I looked up the letter G, this was the band that immediately stuck out to me as like, I know they were around through that entire period. So, you know, I even own their 1999 album that they had released and were touring on when they toured with Poison back in 99, like the first time I saw either band. But yeah, this was a weird one because I feel like I could have gone in so many different directions as I was doing research. You know, when your theme is album released after the industry shifted, that gives you kind of this weird time frame of like, when did it impact them? Did it impact them? What were they doing that whole time? And these guys released an album in 92, 94, 96, 99. So a lot of stuff going on. So that being said, the band in question is Great White. And just to kill the suspense, we will be talking about their 1994 album, Sail Away. Yeah, their discography is interesting. As I was doing research on some of the albums in that time frame, I started finding interviews that like Sleaze Rocks did with their manager Alan Niven, who was also their producer and also produced and managed Guns N' Roses for a period of time. It kind of seemed like their relationship with him was really pivotal on their sound through that era, and just so many things about the band. Like, the more I read, the more I thought this could be multiple episodes just talking about these guys' career. It was really strange. But, as I'm looking through their discography, you have 1989's Twice Shy, which was their most successful album, certified double platinum in 89, had Once Bitten, Twice Shy, the Angel song, House of Broken Love, Missed a Bone. The 1991's Hooked, which, again, would have been right around that time when Nevermind came out. It was given a 2 out of 5 by Q Magazine, with Jeff Clark Meads describing it as relaxed, mellow, and endearing, though this is likely to engender disappointment for those who hitherto considered Great White a metal act. That's weird to me because I think that's coming off the heels of Twice Shy, which, I mean, Once Bitten, Twice Shy is not a metal song.
Right.
Like it's bluesy rock.
Yeah.
And that's how I feel about Great White in a lot of ways. They're not metal as much as they are a blues hard rock band.
Yep.
So they had this mellow album, evidently, which I did not get a chance to listen to in 91. Then they came out in 1992 with Psycho City. It was their last album for Capitol Records, so we're kind of reaching the end of things there. Reviews I read on it kind of mentioned that Niven's involvement was really big here, suggesting that a lot of the lyrical themes pertained to his beef with Axl Rose, who had allegedly gotten him fired as GNR's manager. I guess apparently Axl Rose just refused to finish the Use Your Illusion albums until they fired him and replaced him. So, yeah, like they said that even things like The Old Rose Motel, which is a song on that album, is somehow like a dig at Axl Rose. And
oh, wow.
It wasn't a mellow album. Like, it was a pretty aggressive kind of, Led Zeppelin inspired hard rock album. Like, it just, to me, it didn't match what the reviews of the prior album said. So clearly they weren't just like, well, we're shifting totally away from anything that could be conceived as metal. But yeah, so we get into 1994 and Sail Away. Album is very heavily acoustic, which seemed weird after listening to what I did on Psycho City. Apparently Jack Russell in interviews years ago said that the relationship between him and Alan Niven had deteriorated quite a bit at that point. He felt that Niven wanted Great White to be the Eagles. In an interview with Sleaze Rocks, which I mentioned before, Niven laughed off the idea, saying, if anything, he would consider Psycho City to be Great White's Eagles album. He thinks it's the best thing they ever did, and said that the album had a lot of cynical commentary about life in Los Angeles, which he would then kind of compare that to some of the songwriting of Don Henley and the Eagles. So he made that reference, which, when you read the interview, you're like, well, this guy's clearly a huge Don Henley and Eagles fan. So I could understand where maybe Jack Russell, who might not have always been totally with it, would take kind of this dude's talking and think he wants us to be the Eagles.
Yeah.
He then goes on in that interview to talk about kind of the landscape in 1994, saying, going into the next record, Sail Away, we had to do something different. We were in the middle of the worst rock and roll movement ever with grunge. Oh my God, what a wretched form of rock and roll. Anyone that had success prior to 1991 had a hard time getting airplay on the radio. They didn't want to touch it. They didn't want to do something that sounded like Led Zeppelin 3 or something. We knew we had a great record that sounded different from the last, but it was also poorly handled by the label. The album itself featured Jack Russell on lead and backing vocals, Mark Kendall, lead guitar and backing vocals, Michael Lardy on rhythm guitar, banjo, sitar, keyboards, backing vocals, percussion. He also co-produced and arranged it and was the engineer. Teddy Cook played bass, the third guitar, and backing vocals, and Audie Desborough played drums. Alan Niven also provided additional guitars, backing vocals, percussion, produced and arranged it. They also had Clarence Clemens, who showed up and played a sax solo on Gone with the Wind. And Suzy Katayama played cello on the album. As someone who knows the band's hits and at times feels like they get overplayed on satellite radio, I found tracks on this album at times to be more interesting than some of their biggest hits. Like, the actual Sail Away track is really awesome. The album does start with a piano intro, which, after reading what little I had about it going into the album, I'm like, oh my God, they are trying to be the Eagles. that ended up not necessarily being the case, but it is very acoustic heavy. After that intro, you get into Mother's Eyes, which kind of feels like it starts like Stairway to Heaven. And I mentioned the Clarence Clemens appearance on Gone with the Wind. The album itself's really good. Like, it's not aggressive. It feels more down to earth and introspective, but it makes me think I probably should give Great White's catalog a bit more attention, because we all know the hits. We probably know them more than we want to know them, but Jack Russell's got a great voice, and the guitar work on this album was actually really, really good. If I were to pick standout tracks, they would be Mother's Eyes, Crying, Alone, Sail Away, and Gone with the Wind. Solid album for post-grunge, quote-unquote, hair metal.
Yeah, that's interesting, and maybe I do need to go back and give the band a little more of a listen. Clarence Clemens is a weird one. Obviously, the long time and since passed away saxophonist for Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. When you look at his Wikipedia page, that's a guy that clearly liked doing these guest spots from time to time. I mean, even as recently as 2011, we played on Lady Gaga's Born This Way. So clearly still getting involved, but even all the way back to 1976 doing Dan Hartman's Images album. And, Ronnie Spector played with the E Street Band in 1977 with Say Goodbye to Hollywood and Baby Please Don't Go. A guy that was involved in did the Porky's Revenge soundtrack in 1985, worked with Gloria Estefan in 1987, Luther Vandross. That seems like a logical move there.
It just seems weird because when you think, especially in terms of Great White, you would think the guy who plays saxophone for the E Street Band, in theory, you would think he would feel above playing with Great White.
Right. But when you look at that list, it sounds like,
dude just like to play.
And, that tells you, obviously a great musician in his time. But yeah, a band that I probably need to give more attention to. But yeah, that's an interesting story. They wanted, the thought of them being the new Eagles basically is an interesting concept. And that's, I guess, if you want to take a band and break them out of the mold of any particular label like hair metal, that might be a good way to try to do it. But,
it's really a shame because as you go through these, and obviously being fans of a lot of these bands, you kind of already know this, but it's like all of these bands had individual identities. They weren't all playing the same songs.
No, for sure.
And I feel like so much of that narrative was like, well, they all got stale and derivative, and it was all garbage and needed to be replaced. No, at the end of the day, you just found a new product that you could market, and you knew that the other one was kind of in the way.
Well, and again, we talk about the record labels being a lot to blame, and they certainly were. But MTV deserves its share of the blame as well because, hair metal became hair metal because all these guys had long hair, and their videos were on MTV running nonstop, whether it was Headbangers Ball type show or running just on your regular video rotation. And then, once grunge came about, the new kids like that, emo-y type music, and it made for interesting visuals, and so you kind of had that shift in the music videos, and there just wasn't the time for the hair bands. Even if the hair didn't mean that they all sounded the same, they were just lumped in together because that was the image that was selling from the mid 80s into the early 90s.
I can't remember what I was watching. It was something on YouTube, but it was talking about MTV kind of as they became more and more prominent, and there was a point in time where the record labels were worried about that, because they could no longer control everything that was getting out there, and they'd even threatened at times to kind of band together and create their own MTV. It never happened, but that was a thing where it was, wait a minute, there are these artists who are getting over
on their own
without radio stations doing anything, and now we have to try to get our acts on MTV. It was a disruptor for sure.
No doubt about it. But yeah, definitely check out Great White. All their albums from the 90s sounds like would be an interesting journey to kind of see how their sound continued to evolve. Of course, I'm running 2 Vault gimmicks as well. We are back to the one-hit wonders, and we are about to exit the 1970s. This week, we're talking 1979. It's a year I know well because anytime you're looking up your year of birth, you always get these facts about this was the number one song when you were born, and this is the number one song of the year. So this was a song that I've known obviously for a long time because it was the number one song of the year I was born in 1979. It was also a one-hit wonder, and we're going to get into that today. It is the 1979 song My Sharona by the Knack off of their debut 1979 album, Get the Knack. My Sharona was their debut single. It was written by Burton Navarre and Doug Fieger. Of course, Fieger, the lead singer. It reached number one on the Billboard Hot 100 singles chart, where it remained for 6 weeks and topped the Billboard 1979 Pop Singles Year-End chart. Was certified gold by the RIAA, representing 1 million copies sold. Was Capitol Records' fastest gold status debut single since the Beatles' I Want to Hold Your Hand in 1964.
Wow.
Thing shot to the top of the charts. As of 2010, it had sold more than 10 million copies, becoming one of the best-selling singles of all time. The album itself was released in June of 1979. One of the most successful debuts in history at the time, selling over 1 million copies in less than 2 months and spending 5 weeks at number one on the Billboard 200 chart. In the year-end charts, the album ranked number 16 for 1979, also ranked number 72 for 1980, so had some staying power. The interesting thing about this, because obviously I didn't know anything about this band other than My Sharona, was the fact that the Knack were doing sleaze rock. This entire album is basically, if you take what rock music sounded like in 1979, this was a sleaze album. And it's funny that this basically sounded like 4 guys that were clearly writing music to try to get girlfriends and try to get women and try to, get laid, basically. So when you listen to this album under that context, it's interesting because I could see, because it was so popular, it may have been the blueprint for a lot of the hair bands that would come along in the mid-'80s writing the same type of music that would then, of course, become popular. It was also an attempt to update the Beatles sound for a new wave with their debut. AllMusic basically had this review, which they reviewed the album very fondly, saying it was a good idea that was well executed, but critics cried foul when millions sold after Capitol's pre-release hype. It went gold in 13 days and eventually sold 5 million copies. Get the Knack is at once sleazy, sexist, hook-filled, and endlessly catchy. Above all, it is a guilty pleasure and an exercise in simple fun. When is power pop legitimate anyway? Overall, you can see why My Sharona was the hit, but I thought the opening song was actually the best song on the album, Let Me Out. It sounds very much like a song that the Foo Fighters would write from the kind of as a style cover of that era. I'd be shocked if maybe they haven't covered it at some point, because to me, I could hear Dave Grohl absolutely singing that song. The rest of the album is a 1970s sleaze rock album. There's a lot of songs that are very much in the vein of My Sharona. The album was all right. I don't know how much I'll revisit it, but maybe better than expected. But I was surprised by the kind of the messaging in a lot of the songs. It has a bittersweet kind of story behind the song. Doug Fieger met Sharona Alperin, who inspired his 2-month-long run of songwriting, eventually became his girlfriend. They were engaged briefly, but did not get married. Fieger claimed that My Sharona was written in about 15 minutes. She went on to actually become a realtor in Los Angeles. In a 2005 interview, Fieger said they remain great friends. And obviously the bittersweet part of it is Alperin would visit Fieger regularly during his final months of life when he was dying of cancer and unfortunately has since passed away. But interesting because, again, My Sharona, it was a song that obviously I'd known because it was a big hit in 1979. But more to the album than just that one track. And again, I think the opening track is really the standout. The 3 tracks I thought were most standout were Let Me Out, Good Girls Don't, and My Sharona. But worth checking out just kind of for the novelty of it, if nothing else, because, like I said, it definitely laid the groundwork, I think, for what would be a decade of sleaze rock that would kind of come in the 1980s after it. So interesting stuff for sure from the Knack.
It makes you wonder, you mentioned that they wrote that song in like 15 minutes. Like, how many just runaway hits were songs that talented songwriter just sat down real quick and said, here it is.
Yeah. Like, this just came to me. Here it is.
Yeah.
Like, we didn't struggle, and like, it just, this is what it is. So,
and how it must feel for that to be the one that hits when it's not really representative of the rest of the work.
Exactly. And that's, again, you know, it's interesting. If you only know the Knack from that one song, I encourage you to give the album a listen. I don't know how much you'll love it. Even if you're a fan of My Sharona, I think the rest of the album definitely sounds different. Like I said, I really enjoyed the first track, and I was actually kind of thinking, man, if the rest of the album sounds like this first track, then maybe they got the wrong hit. But it was definitely, I think, the rest of the album was much sleazier, I think, than both the first track and My Sharona. But interesting stuff for sure. Definitely, again, why it's fun to do these type of gimmicks, because you run into albums that you would have never listened to from beginning to end. 1980 in 2 weeks. And as I said earlier, and I think I'm going to stick with this, we're going to spend 2 weeks, I think, in each year of the 80s, because the 1980s were a heck of a decade for one-hit wonders. 1980 itself was a little on the thin side, but we're going to be checking in with two acts, I guess, or two. We'll mention the two one-hit wonders we're going to check out for 1980. We're going to check in with Gary Newman, who had the song Cars, and maybe one of the more underrated tracks from the 1980s, Benny Mardones, who had Into the Night. One of those that you may not recognize by me saying it, but if you heard it, you'd probably recognize it. So we'll check into those over the next 2 weeks, or next 4 weeks, I guess, if you will. Because obviously we'll get back to Journey albums next week, and we're into the post-Steve Perry era starting next week. So that'll be really interesting to see what that sounds like. But that is going to wrap up this edition of the Hard Rock Empire. Thank you so much for joining us once again for another great week of music, honestly. Looking forward to another good week next week when we get into the music of July the 31st. So we encourage you to join us again next Monday night, 7 o'clock Eastern Time on YouTube. Big thanks to Mike, as always, for his hard work on the podcast. Big thanks to Stowe Lake Media for their continued support. And a big thanks to you for listening whenever and wherever. And a big thanks to everybody who shares our post, who follows our YouTube page. We're almost at 50 followers on YouTube. So thank you so much for those who click that follow button. We don't ask for it a lot. I probably should ask for it more. But I know sometimes you're watching YouTube videos, that gets annoying when people are talking about like and subscribe and follow and all this stuff. So yeah, it would be great if you could like the video, follow along with us, because we're going to continue to roll on through the best rock and metal as we go forward. That's going to wrap things up for this week. Until next week, don't forget to join the Empire, the Hard Rock Empire.